Thank you very much for that interesting introduction, Clive. Provost, colleagues, friends and family, I'm delighted that you're all here tonight to listen to me talking about spec size and video games. Now, the danger of having a silly title is that now I actually have to structure my talk around actually addressing those three topics, but I will do my best. So specs, of course, what I meant by specs was, first of all, because I wanted to use the word, and also I meant 3D specs, such as those that you wear when you're watching movies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about movies. But I also wanted to show this photo, Miami Vice, eat your heart out. Yeah. So it's the danger of being a provost is you get your photograph taken in all sorts of difficult situations. So just to talk a little bit about virtual humans, really, that's what I'm going to talk about, and creating believable virtual humans for movies and indeed for games. So we're used to seeing wonderful characters such as Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and the technology of computer graphics is what allowed us to create creatures such as this that really engage in the movie process. Now, Gollum was created with a mixture of motion capture technology, but also artist skill. Next, we've seen the Avatar movies from James Cameron, and again, creatures have been created, humanoid creatures, near human-like creatures that actually take over in their own right as a character in the movie. And we believe in them because they actually are created in a believable way. So motion capture technology, again, was used to capture their faces, and the body motions, and a very compelling, engaging experience is created. However, not always does computer graphics create the kind of experiences that we really would enjoy watching, such as, for example, Tom Hanks's character in The Polar Express, plus the child characters as well, never really became believable because of something that was missing. And this is something that we've been interested in exploring here in Trinity, and also Jessica Hodgins from Disney Research and Carnegie Mellon, who we've been collaborating with. I'm delighted to here this evening as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some research we've done jointly and with her. We've done a lot of work on different aspects of human animation. I just want to show you one particular aspect. First of all, this is because Quaternions, as you know, have a close relationship with Trinity, or Trinity had a close relationship with Quaternions. And Ladislav Kavan, who was a student and a PhD student and a postdoc here, invented a way of using dual Quaternions, which is a new formulation, to solve a problem that's well known in the movie and the game industries, that when you try to move the skin of a character along with the skeletal motion that you've got, you end up with all these strange artifacts. And sometimes if you get it right, it can be very, very slow. So by using dual Quaternions, he was able to create a skinning method that allowed the positions on the skin to be interpolated in an appropriate and correct way. And this has actually been used by Blender, it's been used by NVIDIA, it's been used in movies in order to create believable skinning motion. But what I'm really going to talk about tonight is motion capture, because motion capture is, as you've seen, the way that really very realistic motions, facial motions, body motions of characters are captured and performed in movies and indeed increasingly in games. So this is an example of a motion capture project that we did together with the Science Gallery for the Biodancer exhibition. This is Sophie Murray, who's a dancer and a producer and a designer, and we had her into our lab. This is the GV2 lab here, where we dressed her up in a black suit with reflective markers. You can see we've got cameras all around because there's infrared being sent onto them, and they reflect the infrared light back. And doing this, you're able to reconstruct the motion of a human, of their faces, of their hands, and such like. Here's Sophie in action. So she danced around with a number of various different dance clips. And then what you're able to do, once you get these little bits of motion capture clips, you're able to put them together in different ways so that you can create completely unique sequences. So you're able to create basically an infinite dancing loop by doing this. Okay, so I'll just show you a video of the Biodancer exhibit. talk about some research that we've done, and this is together with Jessica Hodgins and my student Sophie Jurg, who went for a 6 months internship in Disney Research, and we've continued on with this collaboration since. What we were interested in doing was trying to find out how different aspects of motion capture can intensify or take away from the acting or the meaning of a scene. So we wanted to try and explore this at a higher level than just seeing could people notice something that's wrong with emotion. So we captured a series of emotional vignettes of a couple. They're a couple in real life as well, having an argument about milk, first of all, which was meant to be a slightly angry argument, money, which was obviously a little bit more intense, and then finally messing around or moving out, so where the guy's been thrown out, and when he comes back, the woman won't let him back in. So we ran a series of studies where we tried to break the animation in different ways and to see how that would actually affect the realism of the interaction. So here's just an example of one of the scenes.
I just came from the mailbox.
Yes.
And I got the credit card bill.
So?
$700?
Yes, so?
$700 at Urban Outfitters.
It's my money too. I can spend it the way I want to spend it.
You didn't even consult with
I
me.
don't have to ask you.
We cannot
You are not my father.
to spend $700
It is my money
on
too.
2 skirts and a pair of boots.
And a shirt for you.
No, I didn't see any shirt.
You've been
It doesn't
wearing it
matter.
all
Well,
week.
listen, I'm taking them
No,
back.
you're not.
Yes,
You
I
are
am.
not taking it
Taking them
back.
back.
So what we did was we broke various different, these animations in various different ways and discovered really that faces are the parts of animation that convey the most meaning. And then when the faces were broken in some kind of way, that it led to this uncanny effect of people not really sympathizing or empathizing or finding the characters less angry or whatever. We also had to do this experiment twice because the first time this couple, we're afraid that this couple might have actually ended up with marital difficulties or relationship because of this experiment. But for example, the argument about milk was much more angry than any of the other ones. Yeah. So that was one way that we've been exploring this. Another way that we're exploring virtual humans is together, again with Jessica, but also with Fiona Newell, my good friend and collaborator in neuroscience. We're looking to try and understand what it is about humans in general that are appealing and what are not appealing, and to actually try and measure those characteristics and use this to create avatars of virtual humans that are truly engaging and appealing. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's important for more than just entertainment, but for other purposes as well. So we have a new project that's just starting next month, in a few days' time almost, called Captivator, spelled as capped avatar. The idea here is that we use computer graphics to generate motion captured faces, hands, etc. Okay, but then we also use behavioral studies to try and understand what it is about real people. Both heroes who are appealing in a positive way, but also villains who are appealing and engaging in a negative way. So, for example, in the previous slide we saw like Hannibal Lecter or Nurse Ratched. They can be appealing in a way that just you can't stop watching them, even though they're actually very nasty and evil. So what we're trying to do is measure this in various different ways, and Fiona's an expert in neuroimaging and behavioral studies, and she's going to try to actually measure what is it about different characters that make them appealing in different ways. It could be their voices, it could be their faces, it could be a combination, a multisensory combination of both. And then we are going to try and create morphable humans that we can actually mix the different features together in a smooth, meaningful way. So there's research that allows you to transfer the style of one person's walking to another, or you can change a face from an entire database of faces. You can create an average face and then morph between them. And what we're trying to do is create that so that we have a morphable human who can be morphed into whatever features are particularly necessary for an application. And this isn't just for games, though obviously games is important as well. But it could be the case that these avatars and these virtual humans could actually be useful in trying to engage people for important purposes, such as helping them learn better, helping them to engage with a course of medication, helping them to engage with some education. It's got applications in aging, and I'll talk a little bit later about our future work, which is about applying personalized, populated virtual environments for interventions in the case of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and general phobias. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. Now I'm going to go on. I'm going to talk about lies. Okay, so lies. I'm obviously not going to tell you any lies, but what I'm going, the way that I'm going to talk about lies is in with the view of that. The camera, you say the camera never lies. Well, in computer graphics, it's very important that the camera lies, because otherwise we would never be able to create the vivid, full, complex images and animations and scenarios that we see in movies and games, indeed. So I'm going to go back a little bit now to some of earlier research that's much more related to my PhD research and some of the research of my students following on. And just point out that when you're doing computer graphics, objects have to be modeled and represented in some way in the computer. And they can be very complex. So for example, even these simple objects, the bunny, these are kind of the standard icons of computer graphics that are used always for benchmarking. The bunny, the dragon, and the cow are created, even these simple versions of them are created by many different triangles. And if they are to be deformable objects, then they actually have to be made up of tetrahedra, or volumetric objects. So in order to manipulate them, for example, if they need to come in contact with each other, if they need to interact with each other, there needs to be a lot of computation expended on actually working out and resolving those contacts and those collisions. So what we've done over the years, Gareth Bradshaw was one of my PhD students who spent a lot of time in trying to actually come up with approximations to the structure of these objects that behave in a reasonable way. So he used something called the medial axis in order to create sphere trees, or sphere representations. So basically to try to get the shape and essence of the shape of the object through a skeleton, and then fit spheres in an automatic way that fits them as well as possible. So you can see they're at different levels of detail. So what that means is that depending on how much time your application has to resolve the collisions that you're trying to do, it can interrupt, or it can decide to do the simulation at a different level. So just to show you an example, here is a rolling bunny, and we all know if we throw a bunny down a chute, it's not going to roll in this way. However, at least the contacts are correct. At least the bunnies aren't going through each other. At least they're not going through the surfaces. If we go to the next level of detail, the bunnies rolling slightly more realistically, and the collisions are more accurate, until finally at the top level, we get the best collision detection accuracy. But again, it's still not quite right, okay? Bunnies don't really roll that way. So if we wanted to get it right, we need to try and improve the way. So even whenever you approximate an object with some other object, it's going to behave like that approximated object when you're doing the physics on it. So what we tried to do was to try and make those approximated blobby objects behave more like the underlying object that it was approximating. So Fan Giang, another student, worked on something that he called closest feature maps. So basically what he did was he basically took all the spheres and then tried to put a map around the sphere that described the way that the object underneath should behave when it came into contact. Okay? And he could do that for all the different levels of detail. And as a result, we had bunnies and dragons and shamrocks falling down a chute in the way that everybody knows they're intended to fall. Okay? So what's that all got to do with lies? Okay, so they're fake. We're trying to fake realism. We're trying to fake physics and convince the viewer that this is correct. So what a lot of my work has been involved in is actually doing perceptual studies to try and understand what it is about physics and indeed motion, both in terms of simple objects and interactions, but also later to do with virtual humans, what it is about these that are realistic. So I've tested, for example, this is an example of a collision where there was a delay introduced. So there's a lot of research in psychology on the perception of causality in animation, for example, starting with the work of Albert Michotte. There's Ryan Shull in Yale who works in this area as well. These were the most boring studies that anybody's ever run. I've tortured generations of PhD students with this. But we found out a lot of things about how good people are at detecting, for example, when the trajectory of an object is changed after the collision takes place. Some things, for example, if it's related to something that you might see in snooker or in the real world, then people are very accepting of very large changes and anomalies. Where it's something that's quite unrealistic and that you would never see in the real world, then people are less accepting of it. So recently, we've applied this now to people. So now this is our real-time crowd system in Trinity, and we have captured a series of people pushing each other very gently, in case anyone from ethics is here. And then what we did was we manipulated these interactions in very simple ways, or in ways such as we delay the push, the reaction of the person who's being pushed, or we make him move too soon. And we detected what the thresholds are, because there's been a lot of work in psychology on finding the thresholds for objects, and we've found that the thresholds for people are slightly higher, and in particular if there's any kind of saliency in that. Okay, so you see we captured them pushing each other very gently in the lab, and then we did things like we measured what the velocity was to estimate what the forces were at the point of contact. Okay, and then we had a bunch of people sitting down and basically estimating what level of strength they should be. Plus then we also made sure that we played around, so we'd have somebody coming and pushing somebody very lightly, and the person would react very strongly. And we were trying to find out the tolerance for people to those kind of interactions, okay? And this is something that we're going to use in our real-time crowd system called this. I can't take credit for this, but what I like about this image is that it shows that video games are not just for kids, they're not just for teenagers, but video games are starting to become universal. There's casual games now available for all ages. There's serious games available for training purposes in medicine, in psychology, in psychiatry, and such like. So I'm going to talk now mainly about crowds, okay, because this is something. So my research started off very much looking at interactions, complex interactions between objects, and trying to make that faster and trying to make that more believable and try to understand how those kind of interactions are perceived. Then we started looking at crowds. So we're all familiar, of course, with simulated or CG crowds in movies such as Lord of the Rings, Troy. It started off with Titanic, where all the characters on board were virtual, or many of them, especially the ones who had to fall. Not like Cecil B. DeMille, who used to lose about 10 or 20 extras every day of filming. Now they actually use virtual extras. But what we're really aiming for is something a bit more like the kind of crowds that you can simulate in a game, in a real-time interactive environment. And a really good example of where the crowd is more than just people wandering around in the background who all look the same is a game called Assassin's Creed. The main thing about it is that the crowd in this game actually become one of the characters. So the crowd is actually, and I'll show you now a short video clip. Apologies for the warning in the middle of the screen. So you can also see, even though this is actually state-of-the-art around that time for crowd interactions, there's still quite a lot of glitches, so there's still plenty of room for research into trying to make these behaviors interactives more believable. So this guy is basically searching for somebody to assassinate, but as he does that, he's able to interact with the people in the crowd. And for the first time, the people in the crowd are in some way sentient, they're aware of him, and they react in a meaningful way to him. And the motion capture is very important for that. It's very important to make sure that the motion capture is appropriate. So you'll see a little bit where the inspiration for the previous example that I showed you came from, where the pushing around comes. But it's very important. These interactions are good, but there's still a lot of problems with it. They're still not really quite right. Okay, so. This is our very first attempt, many years ago, I hasten to add, of creating virtual crowds. And this is called geopostures because they're geometry and imposters. Okay, so the geometry are up close. So we were the first to actually mix these two different representations from people. So you can see that the people up close are made of geometry, so they have full 3D, and the people in the background are imposters in that they're just simple billboards that walk around. But we managed to be able to match the lighting conditions between the imposters and the geometry so that you could switch between them imperceptibly. And we did a lot of experiments as well to try and find out the point at which you could do this switching and the point at which you couldn't tell the difference between real 3D and an imposter. We continued working on this afterwards, and Rachel, who's here today, added cloth simulation. We were able to do things like, this is all done very fast on a graphics hardware. We really exploited the use of the modern graphics hardware. Again, we've got imposter grannies. But the grannies also now have textures that are varied at almost no cost at all. Okay, there's almost no overhead, because with the new graphics hardware, you're able to do these texture lookups in a very fast way, and the color variation. So you can get a crowd of varied grannies with cloth simulation for very low computational costs using graphics hardware. So this is a version of the old Virtual Dublin, which was pre-2007, before the Metropolis project, which I'm going to talk about now. But you can see we've come a long way since the first one. So we have people walking with reasonably realistic walking motions. They've got cloth simulation, but they're still just walking through each other. There's no meaning, there's no groups, there's no believable behaviors. So this is where Metropolis came in. Metropolis is a project that started in 2007. We got funded by Science Foundation Ireland. We received €2.5 million in funding, and it's just finishing this month. And the collaborators were Fiona, again, from neuroscience, and Henry, who's also here this evening, from mechanical engineering. And so I was responsible, together with Stephen Collins at the beginning, for the computer graphics elements of the project. Henry has been looking at doing sounds of the city, capturing traffic noises, capturing sounds of people walking, footsteps, basically capturing any sound that he can think of that belongs in a city. And Fiona has actually been looking at the perception of crowds. How do people perceive crowds? How do people perceive the emotional and social signals that crowds convey? And what we're really interested in is multisensory cities. So a lot of research that's been done on crowds and cities has been really just to do with just the rendering of the crowd, or just the animation of the crowd, or just the sounds of the city, or just creating the city itself. What we wanted to do was put all of this together, creating realistic crowds so that the crowds look realistic from a macroscopic level as they move around the city, but that they also, when you look in at the individual humans in the crowd, that they are also believable, that they are behaving in a believable and socially believable way. So the basic principles, not only for this project, but for all of the research that we do, is that we do computer graphics. We want to make technical, algorithmic, and scientific improvements in computer science, but we're also aware that the most important thing is that somebody, a person, a human, is going to look at everything that we create afterwards. So we need to understand how the various different shortcuts that we take and the various different design choices that we make for creating this realistic world are perceived by the audience. So we've done a lot of psychophysical and user studies, and we also try to derive measurable measures that are actually, we try to quantify as much as we possibly can so that these thresholds and measures can actually be used then to improve our graphical systems. And Fiona's been interested in the multisensory brain and using this as a platform to understand how the senses combine to create a perception of the virtual world. Okay, so here, one of the things we've really been focusing on is trying to make the crowd look varied. This is one of the first things that we did. I mean, we did a lot of experiments in trying to understand how a crowd looks varied. How can you hide clones? Our first paper was called Clone Attack, and Rachel was the first author on that paper. And this is an example of clones, so a model that's replicated over and over again. And this is seen in many games when they try to save money, obviously, or not money, time and memory, is that they'll just simply use the same character or use the same motion over and over and over again. And this replication is very visible. So what we've really been doing in that first paper that we did for SIGGRAPH in 2008, we were trying to create variety, and this is a model of Michal. Who's my postdoc here, who's sitting here without the beard, okay? And this is just an example of the kind of things that you can vary in order to make a character look different. So you can change from their trousers, okay? But that actually makes very little difference because eye tracking studies that we ran show that people really focus almost exclusively on the upper torso and the face. You can change the texture, for example, of the upper garments, and that really makes a difference and is very, very cheap. You can change the facial texture, you can give makeup, you can give facial hair, you can use various different accessories. So accessories are a bit more expensive because you need to actually render and animate the geometry. And ultimately, it ends up as Michal, stand up and they'll see that it looks like you. Okay. So so we've done a lot of work on creating variety in an efficient way and evaluating what creates the most variety. And this is an example just just from the previous example where we saw the one single clone moving around. Here's an example of a crowd where there's still just a few template models, but by doing some color variation, even just color variation creates an enormous difference. And you can create color variation for almost nothing, almost no extra cost because of modern graphics hardware. Okay, so the next thing we've been doing is trying to add some more life.
They don't have as much area, they don't have other dolphins to interact with.
But I still think, though, the end result is they won't have any.
Yeah.
So that's a conversation that was captured in the lab. So we captured a corpus of 3 women talking with each other, captured their emotions and their voices simultaneously, and 3 guys talking to each other, captured their emotions and voices simultaneously, and then used this in order to populate an environment with groups of conversing characters.
They're the wrong.
And more than that, you can't change the rules halfway through. If they'd said from the start the playoffs are going to be seeded before any matches took place, then that would be fine.
You told me that was actually special case worse for you than cornflakes.
Nobody needs that money. Okay, fine. Their money because the people who are watching the games are fine, but
Okay, so what we did was we first of all populated the environment with these conversational groups, but obviously you cannot have an infinite number of individual conversations. So we've run a series of experiments, and Kathy, who's here tonight as well, and Rachel worked on breaking these conversations in different ways so that you could mix and match. So basically you take one person talking from one conversation, put them together with somebody else talking from a completely different conversation. Does that work? Okay, can you do that? Because if you can mix and match in that way, then you get an infinite amount of variety for the information that you've got. So we ran a series of experiments where we broke conversations in different ways. Sometimes we gave a completely different soundtrack, but the body gestures were all correct. Sometimes we had the wrong soundtrack and all 3 bodies were wrong. They were doing just random things. And then we sometimes matched the audio to just the main speaker, the person who was we identify who is the dominant speaker in the conversation and match the audio to them. What we found was that the body gestures are more important than the audio, even if the audio is from a completely different conversation. If the synchrony between the speakers and their body gestures is correct, then that looks more correct. However, once you break that synchrony, you end up with problems. But if you match the sound to one of the speakers, then you do actually raise the level of realism again. So there's lessons to be learned there for people who want to create systems, real-time systems where they have lots of conversing and interacting characters, that they are able to use audio and manipulate it in this way. And that's the kind of thing that our experiments are trying to go towards, is try to understand what's realistic and what can you do, but it's also very technical, so we need to understand what are the technical limitations that can help, and then understand what the perceptual implications of those are. Okay, and then this is not an announcement because we're still in the final stages of negotiations with the European Commission. But what Verve is an FP7 project. It's a 5 million FP7 project that is funded with 8 partners across Europe. And here in Trinity, it's myself in computer science, and Fiona Newell and Richard Riley in neuroscience, together with the hospitals. And the idea is to use these personalized and populated virtual environments, such as I've been showing you, as a kind of a tool for intervention. And in particular, what we want to do now with Metropolis and with the characters is to make them, to provide authoring front ends. So that, for example, let's say you've got a person who's suffering from Alzheimer's, who's suffering from Parkinson's, who's suffering from some general anxiety problems such as phobia. They are able to go, this is the solution that we're trying to come up with, and we are working with a certain number of cohorts of patients in Nice Hospital and here in Dublin. So they're able to go to their medical practitioner, who will evaluate them in a VR scenario in the hospital or the clinic, okay? And then we'll prescribe a therapy based on serious games, video games they can use at home, but based on their own environment. So, for example, one of our partners in INRIA, Sophie Antipoulos, George Takis, is an expert in image-based modeling. So you can basically take a photograph of an environment and very quickly construct that environment, maybe in just 2 or 3 days, and relight it so that it actually looks like a realistic environment, so that the person, the patient, is actually able to encounter their fears or encounter their problems with maybe walking outside or moving through their home. They're able to use this scenario to practice it in a VR environment, and then have a special tailor-made home scenario that they can run on their iPad or their iPhone or a typical gaming PC, and that this will be evaluated rigorously both before and after the intervention by people like Richard and Fiona, who will do fMRI scanning and behavioural tests to see if these interventions actually can engage people and improve their cognitive function. So that's the next thing. This will be announced as soon as all the various different red tape is signed off in Brussels. And at that point, I'm going to come to thanks. So I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank, obviously, my team. I've learned an awful lot more from all of them than I've ever taught them. And without them, none of this would be here. I'd still just have those colliding sphere movies. That would be my talk, okay? I'd like to thank Science Foundation Ireland, which has funded our research very, very generously over the years, but also the Higher Education Authority Pure to Light programme, and IRCSET, who's funded several students who've worked here. I'd like to thank Michael John and Science Gallery for hosting this talk tonight, and also always being a very good venue to be able to showcase and test out new ideas. It's been a brilliant way to communicate with the public as well. And we did have an exhibition of Metropolis here where we were able to bring members of the public in to run our experiments. We got huge numbers of people seeing Metropolis in that way. I'd like to thank Professor John Byrne, who's here tonight. John Byrne was head of the computer science department when I started here in Trinity, and was absolutely central in encouraging my research here in Trinity and my work. I'd like to thank the Provost, John Hegarty, who's been incredibly supportive. You've been the Provost here for almost all of my career in Trinity. I came here in '97, you were shortly after that, Provost. But you've been greatly encouraging, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm also very appreciative of your efforts with the new Creative Arts Technologies and Cultures Initiative, which is a new exciting initiative trying to bring together arts and sciences across the university and the technologies in engineering and computer science to do interdisciplinary work that crosses the boundaries. And part of that is the new Centre for Creative Technologies, of which we're going to be involved here, which will be launched later on in the year. So thank you very much for that. And thanks to everybody else for coming here tonight, my collaborators. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you all for coming.